So I think the final thing that really stood out, though I think there is less control over what the FTC does, is the Biden administration highly suggested to the Federal Trade Commission, because it can't direct the Federal Trade Commission, to issue a report, to do an investigation and issue a report into the advertising practices of the gun industry, gun manufacturers, gun sellers, specifically with respect to two things. So with respect to advertising guns to minors, and then advertising guns to anyone based on, quote, military characteristics. So this has been something that we've seen time and time again from gun control advocacy groups and even from this administration, is this idea that the gun industry in recent decades has sort of gone rogue and has focused on these militaristic functions. They want to push out to civilians that, you too can be an army of one, and that somehow this facilitates civilians wanting to engage in mass murder, which, the logic wasn't always connecting there, but that inherently militaristic features are bad. We shouldn't be promoting them, and so therefore we should sort of expose the gun industry for pushing these features.
Right behind the Sandy Hook lawsuit, right? This is, I think, why you see a lot of emphasis put on this in recent years, because that lawsuit ended in a successful settlement for the plaintiffs, even though, obviously they were settling with the insurance company, not Remington, because Remington went bankrupt and had its assets sold off. But,
and the insurers just wanted to be done with it.
Sure, but it was a successful example of this tactic of trying to hold gun companies liable for mass shootings or just general gun crime, which is something they've been trying to do since the 90s. Actually, again, goes back to that Smith & Wesson situation was part of that. And so, but they haven't really had a lot of success with that. And this Remington settlement, the Sandy Hook settlement, is probably the best they've done, even though it's not an actual court ruling on the merits. They never got that far. But the argument that survived long enough to get to a settlement was that the marketing of the guns and their use in military video games and elsewhere was contributed to the Sandy Hook shooting. Obviously, there's serious pitfalls with this argument, because the shooter didn't buy that gun. His mother did, and then he murdered his mother and took the gun. And there was no evidence he actually saw any of these advertisements that they're talking about. But
or that, again, that somehow the militaristic advertising then promotes inherently will just go shoot people indiscriminately.
Right. There's obviously a lot of arguments about the merits of this claim, but it was successful enough to get to that settlement. And so you're seeing a lot of legislation and efforts and lawsuits built around this basic argument now. And that's where this FTC thing plays into all this, right?
Right. Yeah. And again, I don't know what the FTC will do, because at least my understanding is that the president can't, as he can for other agencies, there's a little bit more independence with the FTC, so he can't just order them to do this.
Right.
So he strongly suggests it. There's always the possibility that the FTC does it. And I think
Democrats have been pushing for that too.
Right.
There have been senators pushing for it. And I think the idea is if they were to release a report that said, I don't know, that this advertising is reckless or something, that then they could use that in court to sue these gun companies.
Yeah, that it might do two things. So one, it might sort of facilitate more lawsuits, right? Because they've essentially done discovery for potential plaintiffs to be like, look, here's all the evidence you need. Go forth and sue. But I think the other thing that could come out of that, right, is that it then becomes it sort of facilitates congressional hearings, right? So Democrats in whatever house that they might control, whenever such report would come out, could potentially use that, or even state level bodies could use that to hold hearings and like, okay, we have to do something about this rogue gun industry. I think the same thing is true with the theme of advertising for minors, right? You'll get like the JR-15, your single shot 22 long rifle with a pistol grip. Using that to be like, look, they want kids to have guns and shoot people. Which again, there's logical fallacies there, but I think it lends itself to that report being used as ammunition, if you will, no pun intended, for further lawsuits or further lawmaking bodies.
I find it hard to believe you didn't intend that pun.
It flew right out, and I let it happen. It couldn't be stopped.
Yes, but it's kind of funny actually. The whole advertising to minors thing is really just based around that one single gun and its initial marketing campaign that featured the skull and crossbones with the pacifier marketing that they had. They've actually changed. They've abandoned that now after all the uproar, but I think it probably accomplished the goal of getting them lots of attention.
There
that's kind of the whole. That's kind of the whole thing of the minor advertising. Just that one gun.
Well, you'll get a couple of other things, right? So you'll get so after Uvalde, for example,
the Daniel Defense tweet,
right? Daniel Defense, where it was the point of the tweet to any reasonable observer was very clearly train your kids in gun safety when they're young, and they won't be idiots with guns when they're older.
So it was a toddler holding an AR, right?
Yeah. It was
I don't think the goal was to sell that toddler guns. Whatever you think of whether they should have put any of these advertisers, whatever you think of them as whether they're good.
It very clearly was not, let's give kids guns so that they can go shoot up an elementary school. And I think too, you see it a little bit in the argument of these guns being used in video games that arguably are sold to teens, to minors. I mean, some of them probably just based on video game ratings are not going to very young children.
Well, they shouldn't be, but
right. That kids, minors are playing these games and they're getting used to these guns. But again, for I think at least a decade at this point, it's been a while since any of these video game manufacturers or creators have actually gone to the weapons companies and created deals to use them.
It's really just one game.
Right.
Not Call of Duty. Call of Duty never did it. It was Medal of Honor, Warfighter.
Right. And then all of a sudden one of the companies was like, we're just not going to ask you anymore. And
that's why they
stopped doing it.
That's why all the guns in the games are real guns, but they're not called the actual names of the gun. They always make up some name for them that isn't what they actually are. Although I've always found that kind of weird. Because it's one thing not to have, this is the Daniel Defense, whatever model AR. It's another thing to say this isn't an M4. This is an M53A6. It's like, why? I don't. But regardless, that's what they do in video games. Is they put in the real guns, but they don't put in who makes them or their actual names. They really only ever did that in a single game that wasn't terribly popular, to be honest. That's why that was the last game in the Medal of Honor series. It didn't sell very well. But so a lot of these things hinge on like single example arguments. Like the JR-15 is their one argument for why, for how bad advertising is of guns to children. And then, Medal of Honor Warfighter is like their one example of a video game that used actual real world names for the guns involved. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track. The point is they want to try and get the FTC to issue a report so that they can use that in efforts to sue the industry and then also for congressional hearings, like you said.